the political side of it, and then there's the real story.
There's a lot to unpack right there. It wasn't quite the interview I thought that was going to be.
There's a reason for it.
This will be officially my favorite podcast I've ever done.
So, you know, it's funny, when I heard that you were going to be on the show, I have watched you for so long. I've been a fan for so long. I have watched so many of your investigative reports for such a long period of time. And I kind of, when I was running a hedge fund, I think you actually had a lot of sort of cutting edge investigative reporting. I just remember, and I apologize because I'm 54 now, but I just remember when I was younger that you would get on and it would be something sort of earth shattering, or you would have a perspective on a company or a person. How did you become an investigative reporter? And I'm a little fanboy right now because I'm a big fan of what you do. So
thank you.
I apologize about the fanboy stuff. Yep.
At least I got one. It started, I always wanted to be a journalist. I actually wanted to be a sports reporter when I was a kid. And, you know, I started covering college sports for my college newspaper. And I actually covered high school sports for the local newspaper in the town I grew up in. But then I just kind of grew out of it. I was into politics. I was into economics. I was into the confluence. Always saw merit in the confluence between economics. I always thought that economics drove the political scene. And I just started getting into more weighty subjects. And then I realized that, somewhere along the line it kicked in that I was actually a good reporter. I could ask the right questions. I was patient enough to sift through documents and to find stuff. And I had kind of a knack for newsy stuff, and it just grew from there. I went to the University of Missouri Journalism School after my undergraduate degree. I got a master's there, and I learned so much about investigative reporting. I mean, I took classes in it. There was once a great teacher there named Steve Weinberg, who was like one of the sort of on the cutting edge of investigative reporting, and then I did well with him, and then he set me up with an internship at New York Newsday. They used to have an investigative team. Like all these big newspapers had investigative teams. Now newspapers are hanging on by the threads where they barely have reporters now, right, and editors. But they had a whole team, and I worked for their famed investigative reporting team, which won numerous Pulitzers, covered finance, covered the mob. It was run by a guy named Bob Greene, two-time Pulitzer Prize winner. And then while that was going on, the stock market crash occurred. Wall Street became a big thing. So I got into the sort of investigative side of business journalism, how to cover companies. And it was almost part of it also, just so you know, I got into business journalism because my father never, my dad died when I was just going into graduate school. I must have been how old was I? 24 at the time. And he really was wary about journalism as a profession. He didn't think it was made enough money. My dad was a construction worker. My brother's a doctor, just so you know. He didn't want me going into journalism. And I made sort of a bargain with him. All right, I'll learn about econ, and which I did. I took a lot of econ courses, and it's particularly in graduate school. Like you say, if you put my I guess elementary econ together with my graduate school work, I have essentially a minor in econ, and it was like sort of a bargain with him. Like, okay, well, if I can't get a job as a reporter, I'll write press releases for IBM, and thank God I never had to do that. But then I just started building my career as an investigative reporter covering business slowly at trade publications. And then, I got into a big city daily, the New York Newsday. I actually became a reporter, not just an intern there. And then, the Journal gave me a shot after I broke a bunch of stories, kicked their ass enough times. And I worked at the Journal for 9 years doing this stuff. And that laid the foundation for my career, essentially.
But prior to 2010, though, I recall seeing you. So this is where I'm a little confused about your career, and that is, I know you're on Fox, but prior to that, what channel were you on? Because I am pretty confident
CNBC.
I saw you.
Well, CNBC, and here's how
Right,
the CNBC.
okay, good. Okay, so I wasn't losing my mind.
No. The Journal had a deal with CNBC. I would break a big story about an investigative story involving analysts, sleazy analysts, or Eliot Spitzer, who was the sheriff of Wall Street at the time as the New York Attorney General, who was upending Wall Street. And CNBC, the Journal had this deal where I'd break it for them, particularly if it couldn't hold. If it could hold, I'd go on the next day and talk about it. That's how journalism was back then. You couldn't hold, it went right on the .com was nascent at the times, because we're talking 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004. So you'd break it on their wire service, the Dow Jones wire service. When around that time they got their .com, WSJ.com would break on there, and if you couldn't hold that, you do that immediately if it can't hold the story, and then you go on CNBC immediately and talk about it.
Right.
And that's how I got in. And then I would say, I left the Journal in 2004. I spent a year, almost 2 years at Newsweek when it was a big magazine, right before it imploded. And right after that, I started at Newsweek in December 2004, I want to say 2005, and I stayed to like December 2000. I stayed about a year and a half, and I went right to CNBC at that point.
So
don't worry about it.
the thing that I remember very vividly when I ran a hedge fund in '98, I'll never forget this. I want to tell you about this because I was so excited you were going to be on the show, because a person I was against, I was running an activist campaign, and I'm not going to give you the name because it's irrelevant. It was 20 years ago, but they said, my friend is friends with Charlie Gasparino, and he's going to investigate this. And I knew that you had made it big time, that you were the guy, with the Eliot Spitzer thing and all this. I knew you were the guy. The second that he told me he's trying to weaponize you, I thought to myself, I watched this guy, and I thought, okay, I'm a little fearful of what Charlie could say.
Well, did it work? Did I do anything on it?
You didn't do anything, and I don't think it was relevant. The fact that I was a shareholder activist is sort of irrelevant to what you were reporting. But I thought about your reports, and I always watched them because I would be short a name or long a name or interested in the topic because it was financial journalism. And I wondered, and one of the first questions I want to ask you is you've done so many of these for so many years. Like, I have a lot of haters. Do you have a lot of enemies that you?
Oh, yes. You know what's funny? I get them like from all sides, because now I get a lot of people that like me, or else I couldn't sell a book, and the book is actually selling pretty good.
Sure.
But the internet is filled with the sort of most vitriolic stuff about you, right? So your haters, you'll see your haters more than the people that like you. People that like you love you, and most of them are normal people who don't spend all day on social media, right?
Right.
They do buy books, and they do listen to you, and they listen to your podcast, but they're not sitting there engaging in Twitter fights. And so remember, some of this is sort of exaggerated by the nature of social media. But yeah, I get them from all sides. Listen, I wrote a column the other day that said that, or not the other day, about a month ago, more than a month now, 2 months ago, that Kamala Harris could be the first DEI president. This is before Biden even dropped out. You wouldn't believe the hate I got from the left. About 3 weeks later, I said something about Trump not being great on the fiscal side, spending a lot of money, and he tweeted or Truth Socialed that I'm never Trumper, Charlie Gasparino, who blah 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 blah. So I think that's part of the, and I'm sure you agree with this. If you try to call it straight, I'm not saying you don't have to have an opinion, but if you try to like play it straight, you're going to piss off both sides all the time.
Right.
And I think that's what my book did. What I tried to do with this book was make sure it's journalistic in many ways, so everybody gets a chance to comment. Try to be really fair, but I didn't pull back from the notion, which corporate wokeness and this whole progressive movement is really, really bad. That this is not good for the country. It's not good for corporate America. But in the context of that, I called it straight. I called it as I saw it.
Do you have like a story that you think is like the biggest story you've ever done? Like I always think about the trades I've done where I had like a big trade where I remember being short Sienna, and I think it was another company's being bought, and one of the semiconductor companies, and the deal broke apart. It was like a big, event. Do you have a big event that you reported on that you thought that this was pretty like the big milestone for me? Because you've done the CBS's, Viacoms, you've done all those big ones that are really marquee. But one do you like have the most? You're like, this was the most impressive one that you're excited about.
Well, the one that I guess just was immediately impactful, like within seconds, and it spoke a lot to the changing nature of how news was being delivered, and the power of CNBC at the time, in particular, was in 2008. I broke the TARP story, and I got a tip that the federal government, and this is like right after AIG imploded.
I know exactly when it was. I know exactly when you were doing that. That was such a bad time.
It was so bad. It was so dark. And, it was funny. So the day before that, I broke the AIG story that they were going to bail out AIG, or 2 days before that. I broke it. That caused so many people, caught people by surprise. And even one of my colleagues at the time, David Faber, went on the air and said, no, this is not what I'm hearing. They're not going to bail it out. They're going to likely let it go. And I came out and I said, from what I understand, they are seriously considering bailing it out. And within a few hours, the bailout came. Yeah. So that felt good because my colleague tried to throw shade on it. I get all that. But, just the next day, the markets didn't settle. It wasn't enough. You felt like in the back of your mind, you were seeing red lines because this was like the financial collapse that occurred in the 29 and 30s that you read about. And then I got a tip. I would never forget. I was sitting having lunch at the bar of San Pietro, and I get a tip from a good source that says, they're going to try to figure this out. And I said, how so? They're going to try to do some sort of a bailout. Part of it's going to be like an RTC type thing where they're going to buy the bad securities off the bank's balance sheet. They're going to try to recapitalize the banks in a way that stops this thing from imploding. It's going to be it's a massive thing being prepared by the Fed, the New York Fed, by Bernanke was involved. The New York Fed, meaning Geithner, was involved. The Treasury was involved, meaning Hank Paulson. And, the reason why my source found out is it started to leak on the Hill. They were reaching out to Barney Frank, who's head of the House Financial Services Committee. They were reaching out to Nancy Pelosi, who I believe was the House Speaker. They were reaching out to Schumer. It was being bandied about. I called up another source of mine who's on Wall Street, who's very plugged in, who basically is in these meetings. And he said, your bunny had a good nose. Now, if you know what that means.
Oh, God, hold on a second. Dude, I love you, dude. If you only read it, your bunny had a good nose. This is just great shit, man. God, this is great. This is
from
great.
James Stewart's great book, Den of Thieves, about the whole
my favorite writer in the whole world.
Right, great writer. And then, there's a guy named Bunny Lasker who wasn't charged with insider trading, but somehow he was involved in a deal that leaked to the insider traders.
The Kidder.
Yeah, the Kidder deal. And then someone said, well, we hear the tip-off was your bunny has a good nose.
Sure.
And so this guy tells me this, and I'm like, okay, let's not talk in rhymes here. I want to blah, blah, blah. And he said, yeah, you're on the right track. This is what they think. I can't guarantee it, but this is what the plan, there's a term sheet, there's a whole thing. So I break the story. I go on CNBC. I go on around, I think around 3-ish. It's before the market closed. Literally within a second, the market spiked 500 points. The market used to trade off the lower thirds on CNBC like it trades off today, like Twitter and all those sort of aggregator sort of tweets that go out that break news about stocks and move stocks, or like the Bloomberg terminal. We were just as impactful as the Bloomberg terminal, and then like it went silent for an hour, and I was freaking out. I was like, maybe I fucked this thing up. Like I was calling my sources. I said, how come no one's saying anything about this? He was like, I don't know. Maybe they're getting cold feet. I mean, I literally was shitting my pants. And then all of a sudden, Reuters comes out with a story that matches it, and then I was like, oh my, thank God.
Yeah.
And then the market, then listen, there was ups and downs after that. They changed TARP a little bit, But clearly, we were on a trajectory at that point that the government was not going to let the whole thing blow up, and that to me was one of the more impactful ones. But it's interesting because when you're in the middle of this stuff, every story becomes impactful. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you just feel like, I broke the story that I was here at Fox, that Jeff Immelt was going to get that activist investors were going to try to blow out Jeff Immelt from GE, which at the time sounded like pretty.
Crazy.
It was a huge. Now he's gone, so you know why, but it did happen, and that was huge. It moved GE stock. I'll never forget. Like nobody, I reported it. The activist investor was Nelson Peltz, who used to be a friend of Immelt's, and no one denied it. And I was worried about that too. And then all of a sudden it came out. Immelt actually mentions that whole scene in his book, which is pretty funny. So they're all big. You try to, even with they all move the needle if you do it right. And here's the thing: you try not to move the needle. The best advice I ever got was from Jack Welch, because I was moving stocks like crazy during the financial crisis. He grabbed me and says, "You fuck, don't you try," and he said, "Fuck, don't you try to fucking move stocks. You're going to get your head blown off." And I said, "Jack," he goes, "Don't jack me." I mean, Jack Welch could be a scary guy.
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, I'm not trying." He goes, "Okay, by the way, you're doing a good job."
That's a great story. I was pretty excited about the book because it does feel like you tell it like you think it is. And I feel like, I think why everyone has to read this book is to understand, even if you don't agree, there's lunacy going on. It just doesn't even make any sense. Like, I don't know the age difference between you and I, but I got to tell you.
I'm 62.
You're 62. Okay, so there's about a 8-year difference here. Especially what's happening today, and I don't know. I'm not going to comment on the political side, your vote, my vote, but like there was a time where Bill Clinton and George Bush got along. They could break bread together. There was not this sort of vitriol that seems like tribalism, kind of crazy stuff. But then there's also conversations that don't even seem to make sense. And how have you been able to, like the whole Mark Cuban thing? Why is Mark so woke? The whole thing doesn't, and I don't even get it. Like it doesn't even make economic sense.
Well, you saw there's a whole set. Listen, I like Mark, and
I like him too. I like Mark a lot.
I've been conversing with Mark lately about Kamala Harris, who he's a supporter of. I don't want to get into all those conversations because they were somewhat private, and but I've conversed with him about other things. There's a whole section about him in the book. He and I went back and forth. There is. I mean, listen. I don't know what's in Mark's heart. I mean, he probably really believes in. He probably really thinks this whole leftism, progressivism is better for society. I mean, I mean, he's also very rich. He also can afford to be progressive right now. I don't know what he was like when he was making his first billion. He's worth multiple billions now. He's obviously a good businessman. I mean, he sold what was kind of turned out to be a crappy company for gazillions of dollars, and built a whole, and then hedged it, and then built a business or other businesses around it. Bought a basketball team for X, sold it for multiples of X. I mean, he's a smart dude, but he is woke, and and his sort of rationale for wokeness doesn't make sense. I mean, he was trying to tell me, Todd, that the reason why woke is good from a business standpoint is because all the major tech companies are woke. So therefore, if Microsoft is woke, if Apple is woke, if Google is woke, if all these companies are woke, well then they must be doing something right. So I said to him, so let me see if I get this right, Mark. I take my iPhone, I download the very unwoke Joe Rogan's show from YouTube, and that means I'm virtue signaling because I'm using an Apple product to listen to an unwoke podcast. that means that wokeness sells, and it made no sense. And you can read about it. It went back and forth. He was trying to say the NBA is woke and no one cares. I said, yeah, it's a smallish business. It's a $10 billion business. The NFL, well, he's saying the NFL is woke. I said, yeah, they're a $25 billion business, but when they went real woke, people stopped going to games and they had to be less woke. I mean, this is like really interesting, like why we're in this period right now where woke is going broke, which is the last section of my book, because it's horrible from a consumer standpoint. I mean, it's one thing to virtue signal over very narrow products like ice cream, Ben and Jerry's, right? Maybe Nike.
Sure.
If you want to mass market wokeness, people say no. And I go through each case, Target, Disney, when they flick in same-sex kissing scenes gratuitously in cartoons. I mean, by the way, these are cartoons where, it's just two characters, then all of a sudden they're making out. I mean, two male cartoon characters. I mean, it's just, or two women cartoon characters making out. It makes no sense. I mean, it's sort of the narrative is going here that all of a sudden you have to flick that in. Now, when I did my research, I found out that Disney has like a woke checklist on everything, like how much has to meet these woke DEI standards, diversity, equity, inclusion standpoint, which inclusion standards, which include gender diversity also in programming and in hiring and all this. So this is all about meeting those metrics. And how you got there is kind of where I also write about. But I also write about, and it was an evolution, so to speak, and a revolution. But how it unraveled is the end of the book, and that's kind of where we are right now with society, which is why I think Kamala Harris, this bubble with her, whether it's before or after the election, it's going to burst because she is wokeness, on steroids.
Yeah, I don't understand how she could be a vice president no one liked a year ago, and now she's the anointed one. And then for her to come out and say she wants to build a wall, I'm asking people like, are we in a simulation, or like, am I losing my mind that she said no? I mean, okay, this is one of the questions I want to ask you about, since you're a reporter, and a really good one. How do you deal with this following? And that is, or does it even matter? So Trump comes out and says no tax on tips, and he gets eviscerated by the left of how stupid of an idea it was. Then she says she wants to do it, and then the same people say, wow, it's a good idea. And we're supposed to not know that happened. I watched something yesterday on Fauci where he denied like 14 times that he said that he should shut the country down. And then the very next video was in 2020, him saying, I recommend we fully shut down the country. I'm like,
yes,
Charlie, what the hell is wrong with this place?
Well, that's why traditional media is falling apart. I mean, that's why, podcasts like yours and others, people tune in and listen to these alternative viewpoints. And it's why heterodox views are selling right now. And I think, people like you should be happy about it. Same with me. Because when things get that absurd in the mainstream media, that's when people start flocking away, start moving away from it, which they are.
Sure.
I mean, I cover media a lot. I broke a big story today in the Post about Paramount and how they have Skydance, the studio, secretly got DOJ approval to buy Paramount and all this, and all the machinations, which does not speak directly to my book. But the bigger point is, Paramount's a big media company, owns CBS, owns studios. It is literally falling apart.
Sure. I
write the balance sheet. One of the reasons why it's falling apart, because CBS is too woke and people aren't watching it. And guess what? Its movies are too woke and people aren't watching them as well. When they produce a non-woke movie, like they went, early on, I think they partnered initially with Skydance to do Top Gun Maverick. That movie sold.
Yeah.
So remember what's going on here. There's a consumer backlash. And that's why heterodox views like yours and Tucker Carlson's podcast and Joe Rogan, that's why you guys are making a living.
Are you going to keep doing this? Because I will tell you, I hope, obviously I hope you do. I see a lot of your stuff. It's compelling. You clearly know how to do this now. I mean, you are clearly in your prime of being able to be connected and get this stuff done. Are you going to keep doing it?
Yeah. I think so. As long as my prostate holds out. I mean, literally, I had prostate cancer 2 years ago. Now everything is fine, and but health. I'm talking less about prostate, but health, and I take care of myself health-wise.
Yeah, but you're 60 years old. Getting prostate at 60, if you deal with it,
Yeah, no, I know.
it doesn't really. It's not a life ender. I mean, as long as you deal with it.
Here's the thing. I'll never forget when I got it. The guy says, "Well, we did your biopsy. We got it." I go, "Dude, I just ran 6 miles. I run a lot. I lift weights. I work out like crazy. Been doing it my entire life." But life throws you curveballs. But so I look at it this way: as long as my health stays, as long as I stay healthy, I'm making every effort to make that
Sure.
the case. Going to bed at 9, waking up at 6. I'm going to be doing this as long as I can.
That's great. Well, Charlie, I appreciate the book. I hope it does really, really well. It's it's fun to watch you. It's a lot. I mean, when you call people, I think they're pretty fearful of what you're possibly going to say. So
I give everybody a fair shake, though, Todd. I don't, and I don't do hatchet jobs.
no, what did you think about? There's certain things that have happened under your watch that I always thought was interesting. Me growing up, kind of watching you. I mean, there's an 8-year difference, but I guess that makes sense because I was running a hedge fund pretty young. But there is some weird contrast that happen around people being sort of like the sheriff of Wall Street. I'm talking about Eliot Spitzer. And if you recall, and I'm having a brain fade right now, but Bernie Marcus's partner is a big Wall Street guy.
Ken Langone.
Ken Langone. And Ken was just aggressively against what Eliot Spitzer was doing. And
now that we have a few minutes, I'll get into that. I wrote a book about that too. It was about Dick Grasso. It was called King of the Club.
No, I know. That's where I was going.
So,
yeah.
Now here's the interesting thing. Eliot Spitzer, truth be told, was a source of mine on a lot of stuff. When he went after Grasso, I actually told him, I said, "This is a stupid case." And he said, "Well, Grasso might be a nice guy to have a glass of wine with, but I found this is what he said. There's a little bit of, anti-Italian stuff, like a glass of wine, share a slice of pizza with. But he ran the New York Stock Exchange. He took too much money out of it. Blah 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 blah. It was all about his pay package." I go, "Yeah, but the New York Stock Exchange is a bunch of rich guys. He did get paid a lot of money. Ken Langone was the head of the compensation committee that paid him.
Sure.
But he made the people that owned the New York Stock Exchange, which were the seat holders. Remember, there was seats that in there.
Right.
They were all multimillionaires. This is not like the United Way. You're using a law that's meant to make sure the United Way, a charity nonprofit, doesn't rip off, people. This is not a charity.
Sure.
It's like, why aren't you going after the NFL? The way they pay Roger Goodell. They're a charity. They're
Right.
I mean, they're a nonprofit. They're not a charity. And Roger Goodell gets paid $20 million a year. I mean, I it's an NBA. What's the difference? And he couldn't answer me. I mean, it was obviously very politically motivated.
Sure.
And I called him out on it. And me and Eliot Spitzer went toe to toe so many times. He tried to get me. I mean, I don't know if he tried to get me fired, but he wrote letters to Newsweek. Was always up CNBC's rear end because he didn't like my coverage. I obviously wrote a book about it. And I'll never forget. So then he gets blown out as governor.
In the past few days, I've begun to atone for my private failings with my wife, Soda, my children, and my entire family. The remorse I feel will always be with me. Words cannot describe how grateful I am for the love and compassion they have shown me. From those to whom much is given, much is expected. I have been given much: the love of my family, the faith and trust of the people of New York, and the chance to lead the state. I am deeply sorry that I did not live up to what was expected of me.
And I write about it even more. Then he comes back as a couple years later, and he gets blown out as governor because he was involved in prostitution scandal. Lying. He's just so typical of him. He's having sex with prostitutes while he was busting Johns. I mean, that was part of what his office was. It was so hypocritical.
Yeah.
And I don't care what he does, but it was the hypocrisy that I wrote about. So he's out. He's making a comeback, and I'll never forget. It was like, I want to say 2012, 13. He was making a comeback. I just finished a book about insider trading called Circle of Friends, and he and I were both on at the at CBS Studios, and I'm humping my book, and he's on because he's now running for New York City Control. So we're in the green room, and he's like, Charlie, I got to talk to you about this. This is great. I'm going to run, and you and I should, you're a smart guy. We should put our past different. I said, oh, Eliot, I'm all ears. So I leave the studio, I go home, and I'm still, I'm trying to sell my book. I get a call from a source. He goes, don't you remember this one thing with Eliot Spitzer? I'm like, no. He goes, come on, I told you about this. And it was this scene where this is what got Eliot Spitzer in trouble. He had sex with the prostitute. I believe her name was Ashley Dupre.
Yeah.
A tall girl, very expensive. And he did it in D.C. And it was always odd that he did it in D.C. The same day he did it in D.C., if you know this, because you have to match this up with the indictment or the chart. When they didn't indict Spitzer. They kind of let him. They really never indict Johns. They mentioned him. He was client number 9 as when they indicted the whorehouse, essentially. Right. So if you match this up, the day that he spoke at this obscure subcommittee hearing was the day. It was the day after he had sex with Ashley Dupre. So what was so obvious is that Eliot Spitzer finagled his way into this ridiculous hearing about bond insurance that his insurance commissioner was supposed to speak at with 5 other insurance commissioners. He said, no, fuck you, I'm speaking. And the insurance commissioner's like, what are you talking about? He goes, what do you know about bond insurance? He goes, no, I'll figure it out. I got to speak. I got to be down. He goes, I had to be down in Washington, D.C. So, and he goes down there, on the governor's jet, the whole thing.
Sure.
And he stays the night at the Mayflower Hotel, which is a night he had sex with Ashley Dupre.
Yeah.
Which obviously, the reason why he muscled himself into that hearing was so he can make her an excuse to go to D.C. and have sex with Ashley Dupre and not do it in New York where he might be seen. So that day, I get that tip. And then I get this. I said, well, I'm going to write this. He's up 30% in the polls, by the way. So I call him. I said, listen, I'm doing this story. And he goes, I'm going to sue you. I said, no, you're not. He goes, it's true. And he goes, this is outrageous. I'm calling your editor. I said, call. So I called the editor. I said, he's going to call. He goes, fuck him. It was call Allen who ran they put it on page 1 the next day.
Oh my God.
The headline was Eliot's best laid plans, laid, L-A-I-D, plans. And his poll numbers went down like he was done. It was over the next day.
Right. It's funny you say that because when he was done, when Trump had the pussy grabber thing, I said to my wife, he's done.
And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Whatever you want. Grab him by the pussy.
And then sure enough, because it reminded me of Gary Hart, and then sure enough, he wasn't done, right? So things...
Well, he wasn't convicted. He said something really crass and stupid. This guy actually did this, and he was hypocritical.
Right.
And then he used the corporate plane, or not the corporate plane, the governor's, like, he used, like, some of their transportation to go down. I mean, listen, he is the governor. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was, like, security probably down there with him, right? He muscled his way into this stupid hearing, which he didn't have to be in.
Hey, I appreciate you so much. I love your reporting. Keep doing what you're doing. We're going to give away some books, and I have a conference coming up, Risk On Conference, every year in Vegas. We're going to give some away there. Charlie, thank you for being here.
Maybe I'll see you there.
No, I'm going to explain to you real quick. Don't be rolling yet. There's a reason for it.